history between leadership of one person, leadership of several people, then leadership of one person again. Now, the one person, we need to admit, although she never wanted to be a leader, was really H.P. Blavatsky. And she was such an overwhelming personality with so much material to share, and really apparently also a very friendly, very nice person who easily acquired the goodwill and the friendship of people. So after she was gone, which was just before the year 1900, then the leadership in more ways than one devolved onto Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, her American companion, and the president officially of the Theosophical Society for that time, a very interesting gentleman. And what particularly interests me at the present time is that my historian friend has discovered among the, and there are, this book is full of photographs of 100 years old, but anyway, a very old photograph in Adyar at the Bay of Bengal, where Adyar is located in the south of India, and it's where the Adyar River and the ocean and the Bay of Bengal come together. So there is quite a bit of water there. I'm talking about it as if I knew something. I had 3 invitations and never went there. Why I haven't done that is not really me to tell, because there were circumstances that forced me really to do that. Among them, the then death of the international president, John Coates, a splendid Scotch gentleman from the family who made the Coates and Clark's thread. If you ever were sewing and you maybe came across Coates and Clark's thread, that was his family. Very interesting gentleman. But anyway, he had invited me to come. He said he'll be in Los Angeles at a particular time, and then we would settle the final things. So he came, and he died. So I said to myself, if that's not a sign, then I don't know what is. So I said, well, God bless John Coates, I didn't go. Now, whether this is an important circumstance in my life or anybody else's, I'm not really sure. But I thought I'd mention it anyway. However, the picture that delighted me so much, and that was discovered by our prime historian in New York, is Colonel Olcott in Adyar, swimming in the Adyar River, where the 2 waterways come together, lying on his back in his bathing trunks, with a long cigar in his mouth, and reading a newspaper while he's swimming on his back. So that's a good 19th century image, I think, and it also indicates that the founding president, just like myself, really liked cigars, and that he was considerably revered for that. Another story about Colonel Olcott that I came up with one time was from Ernest Wood, whom I'll mention several times today. So Professor Wood was at that time living in Adyar, and he was a pretty active Scotsman. So he he walked into the Nilgiri Hills and around there, long walks, and he came across an old yogi. And the yogi was sitting there on his leopard skin seat and asking, "Oh, are you from Adyar down below?" And then Professor Wood said, "Yes." And then he said, "Oh, if you are, do they still have that good Professor Ernest Wood there? He used to take big walks and come up to me and always gave me one of those very nice little cigars." So just maybe to reassure you that you are not a sworn opponent of the sacred weed of the American Indians, then maybe you are doing right. So whatever the case may be, I have not seen that photograph with the colonel with his majestic, huge beard, riding the waves, lying in the Bay of Bengal, with a big British Indian newspaper in his hand, and a long cigar, sort of Winston Churchill type cigar in his mouth, and said to myself, "Oh no, that's really good." In any event, when HP Blavatsky died, as I say, just before the change of the century, she had moved to England. She had passed away in England, but she was still sort of the unknown superior, shall we say, of everybody. But of course, her very close associate and advisor and companion was Colonel Olcott, Henry Steele Olcott, from an old New England family. And if you go ever to Connecticut, we have very good friends there, then you should go there. And if you walk around in Hartford, Connecticut, you will find a street that is named after his name. The Olcott family, a very, very long-time residents of Connecticut, had lived there, and they had a street named after them. So he was the Russian exile and the New England Yankee together who founded the Theosophical Society. Madame Blavatsky was a great devotee of cigarettes, which she rolled herself, and Colonel Olcott was a great devotee of cigars. So I would say the tobacco impulse was there, and if anybody doesn't like it, let me be sure that they wouldn't give a damn. Because they like to live their life according to the dictates of their nature, and I think that was very, very great. And as they say, even the Hindus who were very doubtful about tobacco, because the English were smoking it. And the Hindus didn't want to be like the English. So nevertheless, they did, and in this case it turned out to our benefit. So now why I brought this up, I'm not sure, just because I didn't have my evening cigar probably, but but one a day is real good. It's not going to hurt you. Now if you go much more than that, then maybe. In any event, what needs to be mentioned that both Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott were greatly highly regarded, greatly revered in India, and that it was sort of generally known that in addition to their spiritual interests, that they were also great friends of India and great friends of the Indian spiritual tradition to the end. So Colonel Olcott then remained the international president, which is a legal term in the society, which he was already before. And then, not so many years later, 1906, I'm not very good at numerals, but I remember that one, 1906, Colonel Olcott passed away in Adyar also. Now, I am somewhat in quandary as to whether I should say too much about his death, because in a way I have perhaps more information than other people, owing to the fact that the person who was next to being there, whose wife was there all the time that Colonel Olcott died, had told me about it. On the other hand, I don't think it's that important, because it needs to really deal with the unusual occult phenomena which impress a lot of people, but they don't impress me all that much. I'm more interested in that which is beyond that level. In any event, Colonel Olcott was old and maybe had a few too many cigars, I don't know, but in any event, he was getting more and more feeble, and he had with him an American lady secretary whom he brought from California, and that was Mrs. Marie Rusak Hotchner. By the time I knew her, well, I didn't know her because she died before I got her, but by the time I knew that name, she was in California. Marie Rusak Hotchner was living here in Hollywood for a long, long time, but then Colonel Olcott persuaded her to come to India with him and to be his secretary. And then she went and was there for a long time. This lady was a fabulous character, as so many of the early theosophists were. So one day when we have the opportunity to go up, get a nice crowd of us to go up to the old Crotona here, which is sort of caddy corners from here on the other side of the Beechwood Canyon. That is where Crotona, the old Crotona, was built, and much of that was the work of Marie Rusak Hotchner. She was, among other things, must have been a fabulous woman. I always regret it so greatly that I didn't have the opportunity to see her in person, only in pictures. But she was an amateur architect, built several of the buildings, designed several of the buildings there, including the main beautiful building, which was really the headquarters building of Old Crotona, and which is built in what is called, what is it called? It is called I think it's called the British, Spanish, Indian style. Now, that's quite a few styles put together. And what it is really, actually, excuse me, I shouldn't have said English, but Moorish. So when you see it, it's still there. It hasn't been torn down. It's a heck of a beautiful building, and it is really, according to the books, the archives, it is one of the best Moorish architectural buildings, or British Moorish architectural buildings on the North American continent. So it's really beautiful. And what that is, the Moors, who were really Arabs, African Arabs, had occupied much of Spain for a long time. And when they were there, they built a lot of buildings. And many of them are exceedingly beautiful. They were great architects. Well, they were great architects in other places too. If you go to Iraq, if you go to some of the Arab countries there, they have mosques and various buildings that knock out your eyes. But this one was just built for the Theosophists, and she was the architect. In any event, now she was, owing to her job with Colonel Olcott, she was present at his death. She was in Adyar at the headquarters, and when he started getting seriously ill and so forth, then she went in and spent, I think, most of her time with her. Now, she passed away not very long after that, but on the other hand, her widowed husband, Mr. Henry Hotchner, who was a very interesting man, and whom I did have the pleasure of knowing, and who, by the way, owing to his generosity and good taste, had donated to us all of these stained glass windows. These were all given to us. Well, I mean, he paid for the glassmaker who installed them. It took about a month to put them in. But anyway, Mr. Hotchner was a very interesting, very generous man. And at times his generosity extended to storytelling, which I think is a good habit for older people. I wish I had more of an opportunity to do it, because, old people are always happy when they're telling stories. And I know about that. In any event, Mr. Hotchner, Henry Hotchner, Uncle Henry as everybody called him, because he was arguably the oldest member of the Theosophical Lodge here, but a very interesting man. You had to be careful with it. If you rubbed him the wrong way, he could be very put out. And he did it to me a few times. But then he said afterwards, come on, he says, don't worry about it. A very generous gentleman. And so Mr. Hotchner has been told of the experiences of his late wife at the time of the death of Colonel Olcott, because she was with him by then all the time. And so to repeat it all, or even most of it, I think would be somewhat counterproductive, but let's put it that way. If you accept that story, that mythology, that there were what the early Theosophists called masters, and that these beings, sort of half spiritual and half physical, would make very distinct appearances, talk to people, make themselves known. Well, she was there in the room because she was a woman of many, many talents, and she she had some training in the medical profession as well as many other professions, so she felt that she should be with the colonel when he was so sick. Well, while she was there with the colonel, things would happen. I'm trying to recall some of them. One of them, for instance, he was lying in bed. He was already pretty bad shape, and he reached out his hands up in the air, and he called out in a loud voice, saying, "Old horse, you have come to see me again." And Old Horse was his nickname for HP Blavatsky. And, a number of things of that sort. Then, a little later, and they had a Hindu servant in the house. He was in the room, but Mrs. Hotchner was also. And she says, there's no doubt about it, that she and, I don't know what his name was, Narayan or something like that, and the Hindu fellow and so forth, saw a figure which she recognized, if you can call it that, recognized as the Master Moria, walked through the wall and entered the picture, and he went over to Colonel Olcott and spoke to him for a while, and then, of course, when this illustrious figure, as they undoubtedly all regarded him, saw the master coming in through the wall, he was totally taken, so he stepped out of the bed and fell down on his face. Something that I'm now increasingly familiar with. And this gigantic, tall figure in Hindu dress with a big beard says, bent down and picked him up like a baby and put him back on the bed. Now, see, my interpretation of the master mythos is different. It's heterodox, and even now I have my doubts about a lot of it. But these things, I know Mr. Hotchner was no liar, because I knew him well enough. And if he had trusted his wife that much, then she wasn't one either. So anyway, there were strange things happening there. And when Madame Blavatsky's spectre, whatever we wish to call it, ghost, appeared in the room and moved up to the colonel's bed, that's when the colonel exclaimed, "Old horse, you have come to see me." Because that all undoubtedly was one of their private names for each other. And then, and I think another incident with that was also that when she saw I had mentioned that already, when she saw the master come through the wall, so to say, and step into the room, then the colonel, stepped out of bed. He couldn't jump anymore, he was too sick. He stepped out of bed and he fell on his face in front of the master. And the master reached down and picked him up like a baby and carried him back into the bed. Now, I don't think at this point in my life that a Hindu servant who was Annie Besant's confidant and things like that, who lived there in the house and so on and so forth, that he would make up something like that. And neither would Mrs. Hotchner. So let's say strange things were happening. Now once again, don't don't think that I have changed my position, if I ever had a position, to the extent that, let's say, I had never denied, and I would not deny now, that they were not, from time to time, especially in those days, unusual phenomena that occurred in Adyar and various other places, and that these should be accepted at face value, and I would counsel you to do the same. If in your own life a ghost, a mysterious being appears, then accept them for being there and salute them in the appropriate fashion. Why? Because the appearance of unusual beings in a friendly fashion to us is an honor. I mean, these are the people whom in the Old Testament times people would call angels, because an angel is a messenger of God, messenger of other dimensions and so forth, and that therefore they should be welcomed and should be greeted. And that is what they did. I mean, the colonel actually jumped as much as he could jump at his age and at his ailment. He jumped out of bed and threw himself down in front of the master. The master picked him up and carried him to bed. So these were some of the things that went, and of course he received also communications from the master. And in order, you can find that in various books, in order not to take up the whole evening with that, let me say that one of the communications that Mr. Hotchner mentioned to us too, that he received, that the colonel received from the master, was that the next president of the society should be Annie Besant. And the colonel said, of course. And I don't think Dr. Besant was in Adyar at the time, but she came from England, and then they had, had an election and all of that, and then she became president for quite a few years. Just to, I don't know whether that's of any importance at all, but you should keep in mind that our present national president is the first international president, that is, the first international president of the African race. He's an American black man and a long-time friend of mine, and very, very outstanding gentleman. So they never paid any attention to those things, but they did pay attention to the fact that there were really some unusual things going on. Now, as to what they were exactly, how they happened, who was behind them, who was in them, how long, this we don't know. But there were about 3 or 4 people at least involved in these phenomena who was there, saw them and so forth, and they all brought the same report. Now, once again, this means, of course, that at least in my mind, which is not the same obviously as anybody else's, that there were unusual, paranormal, spiritual beings moving around in Adyar, and that they were interested in the theosophists, and they were interested in Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, and they wanted him to have a good spiritual passing, and they also wanted personally to inform him that Annie Besant would be his best successor. So that being the case, these are the so-called Adhyar manifestations, if you ever hear about them. Why? Because they occurred in Adhyar and they were manifestations. In fact, particularly Spanish-looking people, I don't know whether any of you are or not, Spanish-looking people whom I have met, when they were talking about occult phenomena, always called them manifestations. So in any event, after that event, then Colonel Olcott passed away and was, I'm quite sure, in Indian fashion, subjected to the Hindu burning on the pyre, and very soon thereafter they called the General Council, which consists in the Theosophical Society of all the people who are the general secretaries, the heads of the various countries. So they all came together and they elected Henry Steele Olcott, and just exactly how long he was in the chair, so to say, I don't know, but for quite a while, and he contributed a great deal to the success of the Theosophical Society. So let's say the mystery has never really left the Theosophists. And why should it? Because after all, I know I was wrestling with that issue, Is this some sort of some sort of phenomena that they are cooked up? But then it came to me, well, if the teachings regarding the various occult phenomena that occurred in Adhyar and so are true, then why in the heck shouldn't they be apparent to those who are there? Why should they be kept secret? No, they were there, whole bunch of people saw them, and they redounded to the benefit of the entire society and the entire bunch of people. So now Annie Besant, the English woman, the former wife of an Anglican clergyman, and a doctor of one of the English universities, which she received after fighting for it. She wanted to become a medical doctor, and she did become a doctor, but not a medical one. But in any event, after that, she was always called by all the people who knew her, Dr. Besant. Anyway, an unbelievably talented woman. I did a whole bunch of talks when was her, I don't know what anniversary, what we did here, I think a number of years ago, maybe the 100th anniversary of Annie Besant's death or something of that sort, but let's say an unbelievably talented woman. People like that don't come every time. And a fabulous speaker. Now, I'll just throw in a little bit about that, because obviously with the significant age discrepancy, I never had a chance to hear Annie Besant, which I always regretted. I might have learned a few things from her. But in any event, you wasn't there anymore. But let me just tell you one little story. When I came to California, I met a gentleman, member of the Theosophical Society in San Francisco area, and so he told me the story, as old people are wont to do, as to how he met Annie Besant. He was a very interesting man. He was, among other things, he was what do you call the people who cut the trees in the forest?
Lumberjack.
Yeah. So he was lumberjack. He was, as a young man, a lumberjack in the northern Seattle forests and so forth. And so he says, he says, if you ever want to find a dull job, that's it. He said to me. So anything to get away from cutting the trees, he came into Seattle and places like that. He came into Seattle, and there were placards and different things saying that this famous English woman who is called the most famous female speaker, orator in the world, Annie Besant, would be in town. Oh, well, I got to go there. He didn't know anything else about her. He says, that sounds like an interesting person. So she said, and this was fairly late, obviously, in Annie Besant's life already. So she came out on a stage or something of that sort. And she was quite old, bent over, not a terribly impressive appearing personality. And he said, by the time she was finished, she was 15 feet tall. She says, absolutely grew and grew and grew. And he says, practically everybody who was there, hundreds of people, each one of them joined the Theosophical Society right there. This woman is worth knowing. So, she was an extremely impressive person. And she was a very generous and charitable person. For instance, one story that I was told by some people, believe it or not, in Montana. Not exactly a place, one of my favorite places, but I was there at the time, and so some of the old timers there told me this. So Annie Besant was in America, and she was going by train through Montana to come to the West Coast. I mean, that's not too weird. And so she stopped, she arranged, and in those days, those things were much easier. He arranged for the train to stop at some particular, I don't know which one of the towns in Montana it was, Billings, Montana, or one of the others, and there was a small Theosophical lodge there. So she stopped the train, and out there lined up were a small group of local Theosophists, probably no more than us here this evening, or probably the rest. And they came up to her to the train, and she said, oh, well, here you are our people, you are my brothers, come here, And then I said, well, tell me how are things going, with your work here. Well, Dr. Besant, I said, we don't have a great many members. Consequently, we don't have a great deal of money, and so forth, but we're getting by. Now she said, that's real good. So she called back, and whatever it was, Ahmed or something, out came a turbaned Hindu or Pakistani, and he had a big checkbook of the Theosophical Society in his lap. And she told him, make out, what's the lodge's name? Whatever it was, I don't know, Billings Lodge. And so she made out a fairly sizable check to the lodge, and he said, take this as a gift of your president to you, because I know you need it, and you know you will use it right. And they were just virtually crying, you know. No visiting lecturers who came and brought them money. They usually expected to take some with them, but she brought them some. So, you know, a very courteous, a very fine and a very mannerly, by then elderly lady. So just about everybody whom I ran into in my extensive travels among the theosophists said all that. That was certainly somebody worth meeting. I never heard anything otherwise about her than that. And all of which made me sad that I wasn't around at that time. But then again, you know how it is, the great old man with the sigh comes along and takes your head off, even if you're Annie Besant. So that's in the way it goes. But she, let's say, her character, her generosity, and all of these various really great virtues, and her unbelievable oratory, because she was generally acknowledged throughout the world the greatest, the most adroit female orator in the world. She gave fabulous talks, lectures, beautifully put together. She must have been a female Manly Hall. That's what he always said, because that's how he was. But in any event, she had, let's say, she had insight into a great many things, which when the opportunity arose, she exercised. For instance, there was within her tenure of president of the society, there was a international, I don't know what the name of it was now, but it was actually an international theosophical conference where representatives from all the various national sections came together. And you know, this was 1920, after Dr. Besant died, I think in 26, something like that. There were people there from all kinds of places and nations and so forth. And of course, she was there. So she arrived in Budapest, and the preparations were made, and the Lord Mayor of the city of Budapest, which was a 2.5 million inhabited city by that time, all the time, was out at the, I don't know whether she came by train or by airplane, was there with the keys to the city. I said, you are the person who is most welcome in this city. We know that you stood up for us, that you defended our country in the House of Lords, and we will never forget that. And she said, well, thank you very much. In any event, she was a great friend of Hungary. Also, when there were a few theosophical lodges around, but she wanted a really nice large building for the society in Budapest. So what did she do? She came and bought a very beautiful old building on the Buda side, very beautiful architecture, and she bought it, she signed for it, and she gave the members of that building. And I think that, I don't know whether they still own it, but I know the building is still there. So, you know, a very generous, a very open-minded and open-handed, and really generally compassionate and loving lady. God bless her wherever she is. In any event, she became very famous. But now I didn't just bring these things up to bring up Annie Besant's character, but I brought it up. So you know what I mean? The reason that the late little story here that I consider important is because, of course, not too many people know that, but Hungary was terribly treated after World War I. Was even worse treated after World War II. You know, we're just the kind of people who get it from the left and get it from the right. But so she was convinced on the basis of the evidence that after World War I, the Allied powers had treated Hungary very badly. They took away more than half of the country's territory. Just threw the Hungarians out and brought in other people. So she went to England, and of course she was greatly respected in England, and she went to the House of Lords. Maybe her being there, it should be the House of Ladies, I don't know. But in any event, but the Lords were all big friends of hers, so she knew everybody. And so they said that, whichever the protocol is, we request a speech by Annie Besant from India. And then she got up and gave a speech, and she said that the greatest injustice of all the countries, was visited on all the countries after the end of World War I, the greatest injustice had been inflicted on Hungary. And it says, these sorts of things, especially the way that Hungary was treated, these will come again and they will pay back. And if you don't rectify them and don't visit real justice, then there's going to be another war. So my lords listened to this, and many of them did, but probably not enough. In any event, the disaffection in Hungary, because I certainly was there at that time, being born in 1931, I was there very soon after Annie Besant's death. But the one thing that I noticed when I was a little kid, I didn't go to public school. I was what nowadays they would call, I was homeschooled, ha ha ha. And that being the case, I didn't have to go to the schoolhouse, the little red schoolhouse. I don't think it was red. It became red when the communists came. But in any event, in every schoolhouse, and I visited, behind the teacher's desk, which would be over there, and here are all the students, behind the teacher's desk would be a large placard, usually made out of cloth. And in it was the map of old Hungary before the war. And it showed a crown of thorns, like in the Bible, surrounding that map, and saying underneath in Hungarian, "Can this remain like this? No, no, never." And so I don't know, the irredenta, the resistance against the unjust settlement after World War I was widespread. But then, long years later, when I was here taking a walk with a Hungarian gentleman in 1956, who had just escaped from Hungary after the big uprising. I was talking to him, and he said, "You know where that came from?" "No, I don't, but I saw it. It was in all the schoolhouses." He says, "It was written by a member of the Theosophical Society in Budapest, and it was written as a meditation for the lodge. And somebody saw it in some government person and was so enthusiastic that then they made it generally available to all the various schools." And says, "Can it remain like this?" And then it said, "No, no, never." Unfortunately, it still is for the most part the way it was. You know, the Allied powers, including the Americans, the British, the French, and let's see, well, Russia was already out, and then so forth, you know, they were not very nice to the defeated powers, not to Germany, not to Hungary, not to the rest of them. And these maltreatments of the defeated powers in Europe after World War I, and for that matter after World War II, these caused an immense amount of damage. And Annie Besant, the English woman, she protested against it. She said, "This is going to cause another war. Don't do this, don't do this." But of course they did. After all, who was he? Just a leader of a strange group of people in India. But in any event, she was a just woman. She was somebody who could see and desire justice done, and he could see what happens when justice is not done. Now, all right, so why did I bring all of this up? Well, it's not quite that late yet. I brought it up primarily because Annie Besant, she became a world famous figure. There was no place where at least they didn't know her name. But there was something curious that happened with her, which I don't think we have any right to criticize, but which can be mentioned. And I kind of tried to add it up this afternoon when I was at home. And this is what it amounts to. The first unquestioned leader and teacher, maybe it should be called teacher, of the Theosophical movement was HP Blavatsky. No doubt about it. The second was Annie Besant. But after that, things changed. And I don't say that they changed for the worse. But now, of course, Colonel Olcott can be called a leader too, because he was a great organizer, you know, and a great healer. He developed healing powers within himself, and he healed hundreds and hundreds of people of various illnesses in India, which is also an unusual thing. But what happened in this case was that after Annie Besant, and while Annie Besant was still alive, the leadership to which everybody looked forward to had changed in the Theosophical movement. And it was changed into a young man who was discovered as a child and who died a few years ago here in Ojai, California, and whose name was Jiddu Krishnamurti. Now, once again, I would be the last one to criticize Annie Besant for choosing Krishnamurti. she had a vision, maybe not just one vision, that a very great soul who would be very important both for theosophy and generally for the world, was about to incarnate in the world. And she went around in India, from north to south, from east to west, trying to discover where that person, a child at that time, would be located. And she went to all kinds of, she was not proud. She went to all kinds of Hindu gurus and asked them, is there a great guru, a great teacher, a great world teacher about to be born in the world? And the majority of them told her that he was. And then how all the details worked out at this moment, I don't really know. But basically, they were waiting for the appearance of a child, of a Christ child, of a world teacher still in his childhood. And this is how it happened. And this was written up in a book. If you find it anywhere, find that book, because it's extremely rare. I had a copy of it, and a nasty individual had beat me out of it, borrowed it from me and never returned it. I tell you. In any event, that book was a book by Ernest Edgerton Wood, Professor Wood, whom I knew very well and who was for years of Annie Besant's really second in command. So there it was, and so Ernest Wood describes how Krishnamurti was discovered. This is not generally known, of course, also. Well, they went out to the Adyar River to take a bath, where Colonel Olcott used to swim with his cigar and his newspaper. And there they were, and Leadbeater was there, and Ernest Wood was there. Leadbeater came back from the ocean, and he said to Ernest Wood, there is something very strange going on. He says, there is a little boy out there who has an incredibly large aura. This is going to become a very famous, spiritually very famous person. But he's in bad health, and if we don't take care of him, this boy is going to die. The boy was maybe around 8, 9, 10 years old. So Ernest Wood said, well, certainly, let's take him. And so they went in, they reported to Annie Besant, and she said, bring him in, bring him here. And from then on, Jiddu Krishnamurti, a little boy, was living not at his father's house. His mother had died when he was very little, but in the headquarters building, and Annie Besant took care of him practically day and night. And he addressed Annie Besant till the end of her days, because she died obviously much sooner, as always as mother. So as the little boy grew bigger, he showed talents that maybe previously were not so frequently evident, and he began to write and wrote a lovely little book that's really a very nice little meditation book called The Masters and the Path. If you come across it somewhere, get it, because it's a lovely little book. I don't make more out of it. I don't say it's a divine revelation. But let us say, within a matter of years, Krishnamurti, which was his last name, Jiddu was his first name. He also had a brother, Nityananda Krishnamurti, who predeceased our Krishnamurti because he had tuberculosis, a very common ailment in India at that time. So anyway, let's say Krishnamurti grew up and became a very handsome, very beautiful-looking young man, and it was sort of generally believed by an awful lot of people who were influenced by the Theosophical Society or not, that he would become an immensely important world teacher. That was the name of it. Others who split off, people who split off from the Theosophical Society, like Alice Bailey, whom as I think you have recognized already is not my favorite figure of world history. But let's see, Alice Bailey, so they got in on the bandwagon, and while they didn't like Krishnamurti, they like, oh, world teacher, they regarded him as really the reincarnation of Christ. Would be coming and then would set everything right. Well, that of course did not happen. But let us say Annie Besant took care of him pretty much till the end of Annie Besant's life, and then Krishnamurti was still here, and even though they feared for his life when he was young, and his brother died of tuberculosis, but not Krishnamurti. He lived, I think, till 91 or 92, and he just came back from a lecture trip in India, and arrived in Ohio, where he had his house, and I don't want to brag about it, but there were a few of us there at my apartment gathered, and I just said to those who were there, also, somebody very, very important just died, but we didn't know who. So by later that evening we got the telephone that Krishnamurti had died. That was the end of that story. Now, of course, in between the story, there were a lot of things going on too. And one of them was that at a certain point, I could find it here, but in any event, by the time he was sort of 20 years old, 18 years old, something like that, he began to get very, so to say, independent. And he went on his lectures and he said, I am not the world teacher. I am not Jesus Christ. I am none of these things. And just, if you want to profit from my teachings, I have teachings, and listen to me, or take what I have written, and take good cognizance of that, it will help you. But he never recognized himself as some sort of a world teacher. Then what happened? Well, he was, I think, almost or just past 90 years old. He was 80-something when he died. And he always had a tremendous love and respect for Annie Besant, and he was always tremendously grateful to her what they had done for him. but he said, I was no world teacher, I am not born as a guru, but I have some things to say that may be useful to people, and therefore I am going to go teach, I am going to go lecturing, and maybe will help people that way. Now, there's only one little incident which somebody told me who actually came from there at that time, from Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka, and so forth. Krishnamurti went to Sri Lanka. I mean, he went to all kinds of places. He had a house in Switzerland, in Holland, everything. So here he went to Holland, in some of these places, and they gave him virtually a castle. A Dutch Baron van Palland, gave him that beautiful house, which then Krishnamurti gave back to him later on. But in any event, he announced that he is not a world teacher, that he is not some kind of a divine figure, but that he has things to say, and that if people listen to him and take to heart what he's saying, it might be to their benefit. Now, he was invited, and I got to finish with that. Yeah, he was invited by, get this, the Ceylonese Communist Party, the Politburo of the Ceylonese Communist Party, to give them a talk, because they had respected his previous speeches. Well, he said, all right, gentlemen, I want to help you, because I see that you want help. So I promise you I will come there, I will stay with you one day. And you have to stay there and not run away. And then maybe you'll conclude from what I have said what I've got to say. And they said yes. So he came on some auditorium where they were, and he read the riot act to them. He said that communism was the greatest evil that ever functioned in the world, and that he could tell them how to get loose of it if they really wanted to be. And of course, I was not there. I heard this from somebody else. So, don't take it in any other way. But this, however, is true. And you can find it in various public media in Sri Lanka. The next day, after he gave his one-day seminar, the next day, every member of the Politburo of the Communist Party resigned from the party and left the room. Wow. And that was it. And he said, if I had an opportunity to talk to all of these people wherever they are, then maybe we could have a more peaceful world. And with that he walked away. So, he was a very unusual individual with great insights and with great persuasive powers, and he had done a great deal of good. And he kept going around the world lecturing, usually by airplane, to various countries in the world, trying to rectify what he considered to be unhappy and evil things in the world, and to rectify the situation in the world. Now, there are many things that could be said about him otherwise, but let's put it this way. This much we can say. Whoever he was in the inner realms, this was an incredibly unusual person. but his calling was not that of a public lecturer like Annie Besant, but it was a communicator to people who he felt needed him. I heard him speak many times around Easter time, usually in the spring. He spoke outdoors in the oak grove, as it is called, because it is an oak grove in Ohio, and he was very impressive. He wasn't grandiloquent, but the things that he said, if you listen to them, were very worth listening to and very worth taking to heart. He did not change the world, but I would say that when all is said and done, he changed at least a few hundred people's lives considerably. He was a great and unusual and marvelous man, and so Annie Besant did find something important, somebody important there. And Krishnamurti is no longer with us. His brother Nityananda died first, but he was an unusual man. He befriended some of the great and famous and marvelous people in the world. For instance, Aldous Huxley became quite a close friend of his, Gerald Heard, another one, and he said, I do what I can, and the results of my work will be seen later. So let's say at that time the leadership, or at least the teaching leadership of the Theosophical Society had sort of moved over to one person. Earlier it was Blavatsky, then it was Olcott, then it was Besant, and now it was the young Krishnamurti. And he had a presence, he looked and acted and emanated an aura that was really unusual, and I would say that as far as human judgment allows us to judge, he did a great deal of good to the world, and the good results of the seeds that he had sown are probably still growing. Being an inveterate anti-communist myself, I often felt that maybe if it hadn't been for Krishnamurti's ability to tear down the communist ideology in so many places like he did in Ceylon, maybe if it hadn't been for that, the Soviet Union and all of these nefarious places would have considered much, much longer. But the Soviet Union is no longer there. Now their successors may be there, but you know what? They're going to be gone too. I am not Krishnamurti, but I'll tell you that they will also be gone. And the fact that they will be done is in part due to the slender, good-looking, always very, very stylishly dressed little Hindu gentleman, Jiddu Krishnamurti. May he fare well among the aeons, and may he receive the reward for all the good that he had done. Jai Krishna Ji, Jai Krishna Ji, Jai Krishna Ji. Thank you very much.